knowledge about this. So if there are any questions or concerns, please put them in the question and answer section, and we'll get to it towards the end. And I know a lot of people have already started putting their names and affiliations in the chat box. And if you haven't done so, please do that so that I can understand who the audience is and can tailor the content accordingly. Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen. You should be able to see the slides. There we go. So today, the main topic of discussion is what can lawyers do after a disaster strikes? It's not really something that we really think about or have lawyers in mind as a responder at times of disaster. So I want to change that perception for folks, especially when New Mexico is a state that hasn't had a disaster in quite some time. It's not something that would have stayed at the top of people's minds. As once stated, I am a team member of the ABA YLD DLS team and have recently started my new term as the Vice Director of Implementations. I also serve as the Disaster Grants Program Counsel at the Legal Services Corporation, and I'm always available for any questions, so please feel free to email me at any time. The disaster that we're going to be talking about today is, of course, the New Mexico disaster, the wildfires and straight line winds. The declaration was made by President Biden on May 4th, 2022, and thus the FEMA deadline is August 4, 2022. The initial deadline was actually in last week, and there has been an extension that was approved by FEMA after a request was made by the state. So the deadline will now be August 4. Please sure to spread the word and make sure that folks continue to apply for FEMA assistance. There's also a disaster services, legal services hotline that's activated right now. That's run by the State Bar of New Mexico and is working in conjunction with a lot of local partners such as New Mexico Legal Aid to make sure that folks that need legal services have an avenue to access it. Please feel free to share that information as well. And you'll continue to learn more about the DLS program as we talk today. Just as one recently mentioned, the counties with individual assistance that's been approved are Colfax, Lincoln, Mora, San Miguel, and Valencia counties. The fire continues to spread and it's not fully contained, as you may all already know, and the work goes on. FEMA is on the ground assisting folks, and we are working in conjunction with them to ensure that the legal sides of the needs are taken care of. Currently, as of today, FEMA has approved $3,037,000 in housing assistance, $989,000 for other needs assistance, for a grand total of $4.026 million in the individual house and households program. The total individual assistance applications that have been approved are 1,122. So it is a fairly grand scale disaster. And the fact that these many applications have been approved means that there's a lot more that have applied that might not have gotten approved yet or have been denied assistance. So that kind of comes in handy as we talk about all the reasons that FEMA will deny a person, and you'll learn more throughout the presentation. Disasters are inherently a cyclical item. Every disaster is the same as far as the response and recovery goes. So we tend to really look at the emergency management cycle as the first starting point. So the first starting point that I always like to point out is the preparedness section. Preparedness is a portion of the emergency management cycle that happens before a disaster, and the length of it can differ based on what the disaster actually is. So for example, if there's a hurricane coming, there is typically a 5-ish days notice based on how the weather patterns have been being tracked. So people have some sort of idea that there's a hurricane on the way and that there should be a buffer zone to prepare. The same can't really be said for other disasters such as earthquakes or wildfires. The timeline can increase or decrease based on the hazard that we're looking at. So in the preparedness section, you really want to make sure that you are prepared to handle the disaster head on. You have all the things that you need in your home and that you are set to either weather the disaster or to evacuate. Then right after the preparedness cycle is when the actual disaster hits, and that's when you go immediately into the response phase. The response phase, of course, is more making sure that you have a roof over your head, you have the basic needs, and that you are safe and sound during the disaster. And the response phase can also be different for different folks for the same disaster. For example, somebody who is well prepared, has a home that did not really get damaged, and can safely stay in their home, their response time will be a lot shorter, as opposed to somebody whose home has been destroyed and they've had to evacuate or leave the home, and they're still in the response phase a week down the road, or maybe 2 weeks. The response phase can also come in a short-term, long-term pattern, and it slowly feeds into the recovery phase, which again is different for different people. Once we go into the recovery phase, you're again seeing a short-term and a long-term pattern and those things. When a family gets into the recovery model, you are basically trying to get back to normal. You're living maybe in a hotel, you're maybe evacuated, or maybe you're still working on some fixes in your home. Until you get back to your normal stage, you're still in the recovery portion. And finally comes the mitigation portion of the cycle, which is where you are making changes to your homes. Maybe you're adding some French drains, maybe you're adding some fire protection across your home to make sure that in the future, if there is another disaster, and unfortunately at this point, it's not the matter of if, it's about a matter of when. So when there is another disaster, you are mitigating those effects, and you can get into the preparedness cycle quickly and continue the cycle for the next disaster. So the first thing that you do in the response phase initially is to look for a shelter. One of the main places to look for shelters is the American Red Cross site. So as you talk to your clients and other disaster survivors and residents of New Mexico, be sure to let them know that there is a Red Cross site that you can find an open shelter on. This is a little bit different now in the COVID pandemic era, where Red Cross initially did, in the height of the pandemic, shut down their congregate shelters to accommodate social distancing. At that point, they did provide hotel rooms for people to use as shelters, but now that's kind of winding down, and we're moving to different models based on the best practices and the lessons learned over the months that we've been dealing with COVID. Well, years, honestly. So to find a shelter, you can text the word shelter and your zip code to 43362 and get a list of nearby shelter locations, or check their website for the map. You can also call 211, which is operated by the United Way. It covers all 50 states, DC, and Puerto Rico. So folks in New Mexico will definitely have access to 211. 211 will not only just give you shelter, but they'll also provide you with the ability to access other needs, whether it's financial, social services, whatever it is. They will help you get to the assistance that you need. And finally, the first thing you want to do is check your local news. That's going to be your first and foremost, your first stop shop for all of the information that you require. So shelters will eventually, not all, but some shelters will transition into disaster recovery centers. And this presentation is very heavy on acronyms. I'll try to use them as less as possible, but you will see them throughout the slides. So if there's some confusion, please feel free to flag it and let us know. This is pretty much where legal aid outreach starts. This is where you first go to let people know that lawyers are there to help. If you're a social services organization and you're holding some sort of event, or you're having a table set at a DRC, a disaster recovery center, please make sure that you contact your state bars and your local legal aids to make sure that they have a seat at the table. Lawyers can be a lot more helpful than you might imagine, and we'll talk about that again in the next slide. FEMA may or may not already be at the shelter or the DRCs, but they will be set up to, once they already get there, they will be set up to help people do their applications and assist with other questions and concern. The Legal Services Corporation and the American Red Cross has a memorandum of understanding, an MOU, which allows all LSC grantees to conduct outreach at the Red Cross shelters and DRCs. So if you are a member of a legal services grantee, which for New Mexico would be New Mexico Legal Aid, you do have the authority to go and have a table there and conduct your outreach and business there. But I always recommend people to stay in touch, know who your partners are prior to a disaster, so that you know what kind of assistance is provided in the world. So DRC locators are also found on the Fema website, which can help you find it. Currently, I believe there is one DRC still open in San Miguel, and it's a great place to outreach and meet people and get the assistance. Red Cross shelters will continue to work as DRCs until they're shut down by FEMA, and you can keep checking their status on the locator. Some of the legal needs that occur after disaster are not often thought of by people. So this is a chart that was initially created in Florida. Later, it was expanded upon by the legal aids in Texas. And when in 2018, the Legal Services Corporation did a disaster task force, they did adopt it and officially put it into the task force report after making it a little bit more robust. So the short-term, long-term, medium-term, and long-term issues that you see will also continue to remain cyclical, which is what makes it a little difficult to obtain and retain pro bono lawyers. If you are working with pro bono lawyers and you are one yourself, please keep in mind that disaster legal issues are not something that just occur in the short term. They can continue for years and years to come. When I was working at Lone Star Legal Aid, we finally got to close our final case from Hurricane Ike about a decade after the hurricane actually hit. So disaster cases do have a long tail, and the farther away you are from the disaster, the cases tend to get a little bit more involved and detailed. So as you can see in the first 1 to 6 weeks after the event, you're going to see a lot of the housing issues. You might have some landlords that are not fixing the property, making it livable for their clients, or maybe they're shutting off their utilities, keeping security deposits. So that's going to be your main issue in housing section. The document replacement side is something that always comes through, especially if your house is burnt down and you've lost all of your documentation. You're going to have to replace it as soon as possible to be able to access any sort of assistance, whether it's FEMA or food stamps or unemployment or just basic driver's license. So having document replacement is one of the first steps that comes in. And then finally, income protection is also something that comes in the first 6 weeks. Disaster unemployment assistance and disaster food stamps. So disaster supplemental assistance nutrition program, supplemental nutrition assistance program, excuse me. Those two have very short deadlines at the onset of a disaster. So DUA, disaster unemployment assistance, and DSNAP, which is the disaster food stamps, they've already passed their deadlines for this disaster, which is why for the next one, we want to make sure that we keep that in mind and get people the assistance quickly. From your 1 to 6 months, you're going to look at more involved cases that are not as they're not as strongly connected to sheltering as the first 6 weeks. So you're going to look more at FEMA appeals, helping people get the assistance that they need from FEMA and making sure that they get what they need. You're going to see more of the foreclosure prevention, real property and title clearing, your insurance scam, your contractor frauds coming through. So keeping those in mind in 1 to 6 month region. And then your family and education sections. This is something that people don't typically think of, but disaster is a time of stress on families. It's also a time where people are forced to continue living with their abusers and are facing a lot of domestic violence. So that tends to crop up a lot more around the 1 to 6 month phase. So making sure that you are geared up to assist those folks with the family law issues and getting them safe from their abusers is also a great concern. Guardianships and decision making is also something that crops up at this time in case there's somebody who has been injured during the disaster and maybe requires guardianship, or many other scenarios that crop up. 6 years to months after, you're going to be looking more at long-term cases that do have a long tail, such as foreclosures, landlord-tenant issues. Maybe there's a public housing facility that's not treating their occupants correctly. And then you're going to look also at bankruptcies and assisting folks in that aspect. So there's always a place for an attorney to help from any background that they might have. I really like to talk about the legal issues because in my experience, a lot of the folks that work, especially in case management, are not really aware that certain things have a legal issue, have a legal resolution. So one thing to keep in mind as you refer clients over or talk to anybody is that if something doesn't seem fair, there's typically a legal resolution to the problem. So please talk to an attorney. We do have folks available at the state bar, at the local legal aids to help with those issues. The next topic I want to turn to is FEMA. So I'm going to give a broad overview of how FEMA works before we jump into the details. The big picture here is that once a disaster strikes, the governor will request a disaster declaration from the president. This request can come either from the governor or from a tribal nation. So if there is a tribal nation that wishes to request, make the request for a disaster declaration, they can do so. And then the president will then declare it as a disaster. Once the major disaster declaration is declared, there will be FEMA assistance available. So at that point, we've already reached that point in this disaster. So we're going to continue talking about FEMA assistance as we move forward. Some laws to keep in mind and some guidance. This is really getting into the weeds, but I want to make sure that you do have this handy in case you ever need to have it. You of course have your Code of Federal Regulations law, which is where FEMA disaster assistance is codified. The most helpful one here for everybody is the last one, the Individual Assistance Program and Policy Guide. It's sort of FEMA's guidelines that kind of explains every aspect of the assistance that's provided. It's very hefty. I do want to warn you, but if you do look at it, there's about 90 pages that will actually apply to the individual assistance portion that you would want to actually look at. So the FEMA process works again in another cyclical matter for every disaster. First, the resident or the disaster survivor will apply for FEMA assistance. Once the assistance is applied for, there will be an inspection visit. So the inspector will come to your home to inspect what the damage is and record it. They will then submit whatever they've recorded to FEMA, and FEMA will make a determination based on the evidence that's been submitted about whether or not to approve your application for assistance. Once they've done that, you have the option to appeal what their determination is, and you can either appeal that a denial, or you can appeal the fact that you've gotten money and it's not sufficient. It's up to you. Once the appeals period is over and you've submitted your appeal, FEMA will then give a decision on your appeal. If you have been denied again, or you're still not satisfied, you can always reappeal and start that cycle one more time. And after that, you move into the recoupment period about 3 years down the road. So that's pretty much where FEMA will come and ask for some money back if they feel that you've been overpaid. So the FEMA application, like I said before, can be filled out in various ways. You have 60 days after the disaster declaration to apply, but in the case of New Mexico, there's been an extension approved for another 30 days. So your deadline here is again August 4th. You will be able to apply online on your cell phone, through the telephone by calling the FEMA hotline, or in person at a DRC. So there's a lot of avenues, and FEMA does try to make it as easy as possible while still realizing that it is not as simple as just filling out a Facebook form or something. If you have any questions or concerns, though, I do recommend you calling the FEMA helpline. The helpline agents are extremely helpful. And if you're not able to get answers to your niche questions, you can always escalate the matter to a tier 2 employee who can give you some more help. So this slide is a little bit of a mouthful. It's more about who can apply. Typically, only U.S. citizens, non-citizen nationals, and qualified aliens can apply for IHP assistance. So when we're talking about applying for FEMA as an individual person, we are talking about IHP assistance, which is the individual and households program. So if you don't come under the first line item, which is the US citizen, non-citizen, national or qualified alien, you can also apply if another household member meets the criteria. So for example, if you own the home, but you have a household member who might qualify for the criteria, you can apply through them. And another way to do it is if you're a parent or guardian of a minor child who's a US citizen, then you can have the child apply and apply through them for FEMA assistance as well. And then you as a parent or legal guardian will register as a co-applicant, but the child would be the primary applicant. Individual assistance. So I've been saying this word a lot of times so far already. Let's dig into that and see what it exactly means. So the individual assistance umbrella in FEMA is quite wide and it covers a lot of different things. What we're mainly going to focus on is the IHP, the individual and households program, throughout the presentation. But I do want to make sure that I touch on the rest of them to give some background on what exactly individual assistance means. When the president makes a declaration for a major disaster declaration, there's two things that he can approve, either individual assistance or public assistance or both. In the case of New Mexico, individual assistance is approved, and that means that individual people and individual disaster survivors can get assistance. If public assistance is approved, that means that the state itself gets assistance for infrastructure and other things there. So what we're looking at here is the individual assistance portion. Within that umbrella comes disaster unemployment assistance, which is where if you have faced unemployment due to the disaster, you can apply for assistance there. Like I stated before, the timeline for applying for DUA is very, very short. So it's already passed for this year, for this disaster. So for future disasters, it's good to keep in mind that, you know, those things have super short deadlines. It also varies by the state. So we want to keep in mind what the state is doing for the deadlines there. The next is the Disaster Legal Services Program. The DLS program is technically a FEMA program, but it's run by the American Bar Association. FEMA basically funds the ABA to run the DLS program. The DLS program comes in when a disaster hits and will collaborate with local stakeholders on the ground to ensure that a hotline has been established and that there's a press release out there allowing for people to get legal assistance through the legal aid providers or the state bar or volunteer attorneys. Our job is to just make sure that things are coordinated well, and the hotline number that is connected to the national hotline number will be written in the denial letters that people get. So once people get their denial letter from FEMA, it'll stay right there to contact legal aid, and they'll be able to reach the attorneys directly. The next one is mass care and emergency assistance. This is basically funding that FEMA will give to the states to help with emergency issues. DCM is disaster case management, and that's funding that's given to social services organizations that do case management work to help people get the assistance that they need. And finally, there's crisis counseling assistance and training program, which is fairly self-explanatory. So I want to switch back a little bit and look at the individuals and households program. So that one is also split into two different sections: housing assistance and other needs assistance. So housing assistance is exactly as it sounds, right? It's going to make sure that you are housed and you have a roof over your head. So that can mean either that FEMA will give you money to rent someplace, to repair your home, to just lodge somewhere temporarily, or they can help you replace it with funds. Or they can provide you direct assistance, which is where they are helping you get a direct lease, putting you in a FEMA trailer, or some form of direct assistance, not financially guided. On the other hand, we have other needs assistance, which kind of takes care of all the other costs and expenses that you have in the aftermath of a disaster. So that can take care of your personal property, your transportation, whether there's a funeral that you might need to pay for, childcare, moving and storage. And lastly, because of the pandemic, recently they have added cleaning and sanitizing to the other needs assistance section. So as you can see, it's this chart, other needs assistance is split into two different categories. One is SBA dependent and one is non-SBA dependent. What does that mean? So that basically means that for you, if you as a client are applying for personal property or transportation assistance, FEMA will likely ask you to go through an additional hoop before you're approved for that assistance. That means that they're going to ask you to apply for a small business administration loan. And if you get denied by the SBA, then FEMA will fund the costs, foot the bill for the personal property and transportation assistance. So a lot to take in, but it's just an added hurdle that folks have to go through. On the ones that are listed on the right side where it says non-SBA dependent, those you don't have to go through that hurdle. If there is a funeral expense, medical, dental expense, etc., FEMA will just make sure that you're approved without having to go through the hoop of going through SBA. So I'm going to skip through the next couple slides. They're in there for your benefit so that when you want to review everything, you don't have to watch this video again. But talking about housing assistance tips and tricks, what you really want to do is manage your client's expectations. This is something, I learned the hard way. Most attorneys learn the hard way. FEMA is really there to make your house livable conditions. Put it in a minimum livable conditions. So basically that means that, there will be a working kitchen, there'll be a working bathroom, there'll be a working toilet. And if depending on the number of people in your household, you might get extra bedrooms, but they're really not there to make it pretty, make it like it was before. They're not there to paint the walls like they used to be. And they're not there to provide and make you whole. They're just there to make sure that you have a roof over your head and then everything else is kind of on you. This is really something that I learned the hard way, like I stated before. When I was a brand new baby lawyer, or my client came through and said that, she lost a heirloom rug that was passed down the generation. It was worth $3,000. And me being the baby attorney, I promised her the world. I told her that we would get FEMA to pay for it. And of course, FEMA doesn't do so. So managing expectations is very important at this point. One thing to also keep in mind is that something may be livable for one person, but might not be livable conditions for somebody else. So for example, a person with a disability will need additional changes to their home to make it an actual home with livable conditions. Think about maybe a house that to enter the home, you have to climb 2 or 3 steps, but your client might be in a wheelchair and a person with a disability. For them, that home is not livable because they cannot go into their home without a ramp. So advocate for folks that have disabilities to make sure that they can get their home into a livable condition, to make sure that FEMA understands what their actual needs are. So that's something to definitely keep in mind. FEMA can also demolish your home and either build you a new one or provide you with a trailer. So keep that in mind as discussions are had with them. And then if an occupant receives money to pay the landlord for a short time, you have to submit receipts to FEMA to get the next set of rental assistance. So for example, you pay for the first month, you prove to FEMA that you paid it, then FEMA will give you the next month's rent. And the situation continues on until you are able to get back into your home. Keeping copies of leases and receipts that are unmodified are really important. FEMA will definitely ask you for proof of payment and proof of leasing property. And then if there is a shortage of rental property, FEMA will help you find other places like hotels or motels to stay. It just depends on the gravity of the disaster. Under the Disaster Reform Recovery Act, some categories of housing assistance can be administered by the state. But from my understanding, New Mexico, both housing and ONA are managed by FEMA and not by the state. So under housing and ONA, it's just one application. Everything that you do will be submitted directly to FEMA under just the one application number. There's not a separate application for housing and one separate one for ONA. I'm going to take a minute and look at the Q&A. It looks like there's a couple questions that came in. Okay. If someone
Shrushti, I have I can, I have a list of the questions, so I've been monitoring it, so I can pose those to you one by one, if you want to take a couple of minutes to address them.
Sure, yeah. I feel like I'm throwing a lot of information at people, so we can take a little break right here.
Sure, okay, so I'm just gonna run through about say 4 here, and then we'll go back and capture the rest later. So you mentioned that there had been a little over 1,100 approvals for about $4 million, which comes to about $4,000 each. So that doesn't seem to be a large amount. What is the average amount that FEMA usually pays on the disaster recovery, and will it cover, say, if the average is $40,000 for losses, will it cover all that?
Yes, we'll talk about that down the slides as well, but FEMA can cover up to 37,900 for housing assistance and 37,900 for ONA. So there's a double bucket that they'll be able to cover at the most.
Thank you.
Know, that's only if your house is completely destroyed and you need to completely rebuild kind of situation.
All right, here's another one. Are FEMA trailers available to those needing shelter?
Not for shelter, but they'll be available if you still, like, not during the disaster, for if your house is destroyed and you talk to FEMA about what your needs are, they can assign you shelters if that's the case. I'm not sure about sheltering in it during the disaster, though. That might be something that you want to go through the Red Cross about.
All right. If someone did not lose their house in the fire, but rather in the flood afterwards, should they submit a second FEMA claim or update the current claim?
I would update the current claim and not change it up.
All right, and we'll do one more, and then we'll let you get back to your presentation. So how can a renter get his rental insurance policy deciphered after being told to evacuate his rental unit of expected Guyaness River flooding? A Las Vegas resident said he had read his policy excluding rising water. So he wants to be clear on what is covered and what is not covered in terms of his claims.
Okay, so this is a resident who lived in their home, they evacuated, they had renter's insurance, and then once they evacuated, the home flooded. Is that what I'm understanding?
I'm going to defer to Mary Smith. She's the one that posed the question. Mary, can we unmute Mary and have her ask the question?
Thank you, Juan, and thank you, Shrushti. A friend was told to evacuate, and he did, and he took his rental insurance policy with him, but he read it to mean that if his property had been flooded, that he would not be covered by his insurance policy. And so he would like someone to review his policy to make sure that he is covered, and if he's not covered, he knows that in advance. He was not flooded out. Okay. Luckily.
If he wants somebody to review it, I would definitely ask that he call the hotline or reach out to somebody at New Mexico Legal Aid and see if there's an attorney that can help actually review it. But as far as policies go, if it's rising waters, so basically if the water comes from the bottom up, that's something that has to be typically covered by flood insurance and not renters. Renter's insurance is more covering your personal property when, let's say, a pipe bursts in your house or the roof leaks and the water comes in from the top. But if it's rising waters, it's considered flood. But I would definitely have an attorney, take a fine-tooth comb to the policy to get them the assistance that they need.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Shrushti. And we have a few more questions, but we'll wait and as we collect more and answer those again after a bit. Sounds
good. This gave me a nice break for my voice there. So moving forward from housing, I want to cover ONA. We briefly talked about ONA already. This is also administered by FEMA. Again, there's not a different application. It's part of your larger FEMA application itself. And the coverage for New Mexico will go through FEMA headquarters, not through the state. I already mentioned the SBA dependent portion of ONA, but I want to go through some of the tips and tricks of what happens here. So you have to use the funds used exactly the way FEMA or the state tells you to use them. If you don't use it like they tell you, they're going to likely ask you to recoup the money. So make sure that you use it exactly in the way that you're asked to. So the ONA money is the money that you're using to replace destroyed household items, destroyed clothes, damaged appliances, etc. So make sure that you make an itemized list of everything that was destroyed. Take pictures of it during the damage so that you don't go through some cleanup and then have to go find pictures of everything. And then FEMA will only give, transportation assistance if all of your vehicles are destroyed. So in the household, if there's even one vehicle that's functional, FEMA expects that y'all share it and use it for purposes of just staying sheltered and having the basic necessities. If your vehicle was damaged in the fire and you're claiming FEMA assistance, you must have your state minimum insurance at the time of the disaster, and you'll have to submit an itemized estimate from a certified mechanic to make sure that FEMA can actually provide you with funds to replace or repair it. The non-SBA categories we already talked about, so I'm going to skip this part, but basic gist is FEMA won't make you jump to that extra hoop to get the assistance here. One thing I do want to point out is that funeral here is not the same as the COVID funeral funds. Currently, FEMA has a separate program going on for folks who have to pay for funerals due to a COVID death in their loved ones. And that doesn't necessarily have to mean their family. It could be a friend or anybody who passed away, but you yourself were responsible for paying for their funeral. You can submit that as a separate request to FEMA as a separate application for the COVID funeral assistance. And you have to call them to apply for it, but you can get up to $9,000 per death. It's a grim time that we live in, and unfortunately there is no deadline for this assistance. So that part is at least helpful, but hopefully things calm down better and we eventually no longer have the need for this assistance. Critical needs assistance was actually approved for this disaster. The deadline for that has been passed. This is an immediate payment that FEMA gives to cover all of your immediate needs. So for example, in the middle of the disaster, if you need to buy food, if you need to buy gas, if you need to just have basic necessities, FEMA will give you $500 per eligible household as a one-time payment, no questions asked. The way you can apply for CNA, and at this point we're kind of past that, but it's good to just know about, is that when you apply for the actual FEMA application, there's a checkbox that says, are you in need of immediate assistance? If you check yes for that, then they'll automatically send you the $500 to your bank account. But since we're past that, we'll kind of move on. But basically you have to just jump through that hoop of getting that checkbox checked out next time. Duplication of benefits is a big issue with FEMA. You want to make sure that you are using the FEMA funds for what you have asked for and what they've approved you to use it for, but they won't give you any funds if you have already gotten the money from somewhere else for it. So for example, if your insurance covered your damage, FEMA is not going to pay you on top of that. That's duplication of funds and benefits, and they're not in the business to just keep giving more money. FEMA is a assistance of last resort, so you want to make sure that you hit your insurance first before you ask FEMA to cover the leftover damage. If you don't have insurance policies, then you can apply for FEMA and just let them know that you don't have an insurance policy. If your home is not where you actually live, FEMA is not going to help you get it repaired at all. So for example, if it's a second home or a vacation home or investment property, you're not going to be able to get any FEMA assistance because you don't live there. They're not going to help fix somewhere that you don't live. And the last one is maybe, if a charity or a program has already helped fix your property, for example, maybe Habitat for Humanity, or somebody came to repair it, FEMA's not going to provide you with assistance there. Something to kind of keep in mind is Medicaid portability issues. So if FEMA denies the cost. FEMA will deny the cost if Medicaid would cover them, but you don't want it to get to the point where Medicaid will deny if FEMA covers them. So make sure that your timelines are straight and things make sense there before you move forward with that aspect. The Disaster Reform Recovery Act of 2018 was a game changer as far as FEMA goes. I'm not really going to get into the nitty gritty of it here, but the one big thing to keep in mind is the fact that ONA and HA, so other needs assistance and housing assistance, come from separate pots of money. This is what I was just explaining when I was answering the question. Initially, before the DRA, it was just one single pot of $37,900. Because of this legislation, it's now split into two pots. So you can get $37,900 for housing, plus another $37,900 to replace personal property and or get ONA assistance if you qualify for that. But again, this is a maximum threshold of what you're eligible to get at the most. This amount will change based on inflation every year. So in 2023, it'll be a different amount. Few things that are not counted into these caps are rental assistance. So for example, if you have had to rent a property for 2 years at $1,000 each year, that $24,000 will not count towards this $37,000 cap because it's a rental assistance. If there's any assistance expenses related to accessibility, that also will not count as part of the cap here. So that goes back to the example that I gave about putting a ramp in your home. So if there's a cost associated with making your home accessible, that cost will not come against this $37,000. So depending on the amount of damage that you suffer, there's a lot of funds that you can get qualified for, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get qualified for that. Right now, somebody did that average calculation that we're at about $4,000 an applicant. That's pretty common because based on the amount of damage that they've actually gone through. Some exclusions on the owner. Okay, we already went through the exclusions there. So we'll move forward. So under this DRA, the state did get the ability to control it, but New Mexico has not opted to do so. In the future, if they do decide to do it, they can have control over administering housing and ONA. Since New Mexico doesn't really have disasters that often, they haven't opted to do that. Texas, for example, has, so we go through our DHS to get things done here, but it differs state by state and y'all can just ignore this part of it. FEMA appeals is a big part of FEMA assistance. If you have been denied or if you've been approved and you're not satisfied with your assistance, you can appeal. Everybody has a right to appeal no matter what. Hopefully you're not a person appealing the fact that FEMA gave you too much money, but there are wild cards out there. So as far as that goes, you have 60 days to appeal a decision from FEMA. And that's 60 days from the date on the letter that you get. FEMA has about 90 days after that to respond. And if they haven't, it's kind of deemed that it was denied. Okay, and some common reasons for denial of FEMA assistance. This is something that we've seen over and over in disaster cycles. The first one being that, insurance already covers it, so FEMA's not going to duplicate their assistance. Whether you're eligible for other forms of disaster, they're not going to pay for that if you've already gotten money somewhere else. If you have been required by FEMA to get flood insurance in a past disaster, and you did not do so, you can be denied FEMA assistance in this disaster. This is not something that's of concern in this disaster. We have had specific conversations with FEMA about it. I know there was a flood after the fact that there was a wildfire here, and FEMA has not implemented the flood requirement here because the initial disaster was not a flood disaster, it was a wildfire. So at this point, FEMA is not going to mandate that anybody in New Mexico get flood insurance in order to qualify for future FEMA assistance. There was no group flood insurance policy that was purchased by FEMA for New Mexico, and there won't be because of the gravity of the disaster that was actually declared was a wildfire and not a flood. If there's questions about that, I'm happy to address that more towards the end. It's a little convoluted, but we did manage to get quite a few answers from FEMA this week regarding it. And I'm happy to share the information and knowledge that we got. Next set of reasons for denial are if the damage sustained on the property was not sufficient enough for assistance. So for example, if it was just very small, your house is still livable, you still have shelters, they're not going to waste their time coming to assist there. There is a threshold that they go by, and I'm not really well versed in what they qualify as insufficient. But that is a determination that they can make, and you can appeal if you want to. FEMA might not provide you assistance if they're unable to verify your ownership and occupancy status of your home. This is something that has always been a problem with FEMA, but has been changed in the recent months based on an amendment and change in FEMA guidance that came through in October. And then the last few things would be, of course, if it's a vacation home, they're not going to pay for it. And if the damages were there pre-disaster or were not caused by the disaster, FEMA is not going to be responsible for it. So please don't go burn your fence just because there was a wildfire and you want FEMA assistance to pay for it. The deadline, again, as I stated, is 60 days from the date on the FEMA determination letter. And late appeals can be accepted if there's a showing of good cause. So that can vary on a case-by-case basis, and FEMA will make the decision based on that. And if you have any questions, like I stated, call the FEMA helpline, call an attorney on the DLS side of things. We're all here to help you, and the helpline folks are actually surprisingly helpful. If there is a new helpline person and they may not be aware of any detailed or niche issues that you're having, escalate it to a tier 2 employee. They'll make sure to get you the answers that you need. Something to keep in mind as far as contents of a good FEMA appeal go. When I initially started, I had a client who swore up and down that they had submitted an appeal to FEMA and FEMA was not responding and nothing was happening. And I asked them what they sent in, and it was just a piece of paper that said, "I need help, please. You didn't give me enough money." That's all they sent into them. It's something that's not uncommon among disaster survivors. They may not be familiar with the process. They may be going through a lot of stress in their home or just trying to survive to be able to send a coherent, more explanatory appeal to FEMA. So keeping that in mind, it's really important that attorneys help out with FEMA appeals. I really like to use the analogy that, you can give FEMA a loaf of bread and give somebody a jar of peanut butter with the loaf of bread, but that doesn't mean that they're going to put 2 and 2 together and make a peanut butter sandwich. It's better if you make the sandwich for them, give it to them beautifully tied up in the bow so that there's no questions about what needs to be done with the information provided. So as you draft your appeals, make sure that your full name is on there, your applicant's phone number and disaster number and application numbers are on there. Their pre-disaster addresses, their current phone numbers, post-disaster address, and the last 4 of their social security number are on each page of the application of the appeal. This is mainly because you don't want their appeal to accidentally get misfiled, pages to get lost, any issues like that. And some contents of a good appeal, of course, are the first thing you want to do is make sure that you say that you're appealing. Write the words in there somewhere, "I appeal," or some variation of it so that there's no confusion. You don't want the person that's reading your appeal amongst thousands of appeal to wonder what's going on, to wonder why you're sending the information. If you are writing the appeal as an attorney on behalf of a client, get written consent and add that in there. You also want to state any law or any reason that supports your appeal so that you can provide the most impactful information and advocate for yourself. Some documentations and pictures to prove the statements made in the appeals will be great to add to the end of it. So for example, if you're talking about there being a wall that was completely damaged by fire, you want to put pictures of the fire damaged wall in there so that people can see it. There's a human aspect that comes with it, and there's a stronger understanding in pictures than there is in written words sometimes. So put those in there. And when you talk to your inspectors, they will take pictures as well, but don't rely on that. Add that to your appeal as exhibits or enclosures to discuss further. And then, of course, at the end, you have to write that you are declared under penalty of perjury, that the information provided is true. This used to be a requirement from FEMA, but from what I understand, they're kind of relaxing a little bit on that. Still, better safe than sorry. Let's just add that in there as well. Some other things to keep in mind. How did your client register? This, again, I speak from experience. I did have a client who registered and swore she registered, but she never heard back from FEMA. It turned out that she had her grandson help her register, and he had signed up for paperless mail. So everything was coming to an inbox that was not monitored. And she was very confused why she wasn't getting the assistance that she needed. So ask your clients, how did you register? Did someone help them? Is there paperless? Is it in the mailbox? Are they getting the information they need? And then if there's changes to addresses or contact information, please let FEMA know so that they know where to find you. Update your USPS address as well. And then you're going to want to write a written request to FEMA asking for a copy of the file. This typically takes a very long time for them to gather and send back to you. But as attorneys, it's kind of helpful to have because you want to know exactly what the FEMA agent is looking at as they make the decision. Have all of the clients document everything that they can. So piles of debris, water lines or fire lines, anything that can be possibly destroyed or damaged, take pictures before you fix the matter. Again, as I stated, for cars, you will need a mechanic estimate. For home, you'll need a certified contractor estimate with their contact information, and FEMA will call them to make sure that those are legitimate estimates that come through. If they can't get in touch with them, they will deny the claims. So make sure that those are included in the appeal. Proof of ownership. I kind of touched on this a little bit in the denial reasons. So in the past, proof of ownership and occupancy has always been a big matter of issue with FEMA assistance, mainly because FEMA needs to know that you own the home. FEMA's initial policy was that you have to have a deed or some sort of way to prove that you own the home. That's been changed a little bit now. And I just want to focus more on the changes than on the ownership documentation. So previously you had to prove that you're the legal owner or that you did not hold formal title, but you paid no rent at all, but you were also responsible for paying off taxes. This is more of a scenario where grandma owned the home, grandma passed away, and then you continue to live in the home without, getting the deed transferred to your name. So this proved to be difficult for a lot of disaster survivors because of that exact same scenario. Not everybody knew that title needed to be changed or knew how to do it. So we had to go through the process of getting the deed in their name, going through probate, XYZ. And it was very tedious and it took a really long time to get people help. So FEMA in October, based on all of the advocacy that was done, made an amendment to their rules. And they now take a host of other things for verifying occupancy and ownership. So for occupancy, they're gonna take all of these documents as proof that you actually occupy the place, whereas before it was very limited. And then for ownership, the list also expanded exponentially. If you're unable to provide any of the following documents that are on the screen there, the last resort for you is to provide a proof of ownership self-declarative statement. And in that, you're basically going to say that, I don't have the information of the other things, but I promise I live here. Here are the reasons that I can prove that I live here, but I don't have formal documentation to provide it. This actually has, in my tenure of working with FEMA, we have physically seen the changes in this. Previously in other disasters, the denial rate for this reason has been about 30-ish%, 35% sometimes. Just recently, there's been a disaster that I've been working on with Puerto Rico, which is where we saw this issue be more exaggerated. the denial rates for this reason are now down to 1 to 2%. It's been such a blessing to have the amendment go through, and people have been able to get the assistance so much faster because they have the ability to prove ownership and occupancy in other manners. So take advantage of that while you do your appeals, and make sure that you're able to prove the ownership as needed. So moving forward, I only have a couple more slides, I promise. I know this is a lot of information to throw at you, but the world of disaster is fun. So I kind of want to circle back to the beginning. So when we stated that as soon as you apply for FEMA assistance, the inspector will then come to your home. I want to circle back to it now because it used to not be as difficult, but with COVID-19, it's been a little bit harder to do. FEMA inspectors typically do come to your home, but because of COVID-19, FEMA has gone to a very hybrid model depending on the region, and they may or may not actually come to your home. They might do a phone call, and they will not be able to inspect your property until it is actually in a condition where people can go into it in a safe condition. So if there's a fire still ongoing, your inspection will be delayed in your area. If they are not physically coming to your home and they're doing a hybrid or virtual inspection, it's typically just a phone call. And a phone call is not that helpful, right? If you want to show them what the damage looks like, there's nobody seeing it. They're just going to take your word for it. And the inspectors are required to type out what all the issues are and just provide, they're the people that document everything and send it over to FEMA for determinations. So what FEMA does provide is a video enhancement, but this is something that you have to actively request. It's not an option that's really given to you. And it kind of causes a lot of burden on the disaster survivor, especially if they don't have good network connectivity or a cell phone with a camera or some way to get onto a video call. One thing to kind of think about is, does your library provide phones for rent or hotspots for rent that you can maybe utilize to do so? But as you do that, please try to ask for video enhancements where possible and show them the damage. It adds a human aspect to things and it makes them understand the damage a lot better too. If you're not happy with your inspection and maybe the inspector didn't do as good of a job as you wanted or didn't document things as you think they should have, you can request a second one by calling the helpline, and FEMA just gives it to you. They don't really ask a lot of questions for a second inspection. So let's go forward in the timeline again. So if you have been approved for FEMA and you've gotten the funds, what do you do at that point? Like I said before, keep all of your receipts, document everything that you've done, and make sure that you use it how FEMA tells you to use it. Now, about 3 years post the disaster, FEMA does come back and ask folks that have been overpaid or have been using funds like in a way that they're not supposed to repay, and FEMA will claw back that money. So make sure that you have kept good records of everything. And if FEMA requires you to get flood insurance, which they are not doing for this disaster, then you should get flood insurance. That's not the case here, so I don't want to confuse people by harping on that more. And then finally, there's a slide at the end with helpful links. I do want to turn your attention to the last one, which is Legal Aid Disaster Resource Center. It is a multi-partner website that's managed by the Legal Services Corporation. It's a one-stop shop and provides a lot of manuals and flyers and information for disaster survivors, attorneys, case managers and social services workers, and also legal aid organizations. So please check out the website if you have questions or if you're looking for resources. If you are a legal aid attorney or a lawyer that does pro bono work, you can sign up for the Help Center to get some access to password protected information as well. I'll go ahead and take the rest of the questions now, but that's pretty much all of the slides, and we'll be sure to share them with you.
Thanks again, Shrushti. Very helpful information. I'll go ahead and pose several of the questions. There's a couple that are similar here regarding reconstruction. So when does the repair replacement start? And when does the permanent housing construction begin for those who lost their homes entirely?
That will be a very case-by-case basis and depends on the region itself. A lot of it depends also on the availability. I would definitely check with FEMA as you apply, but the replacement and everything might take a little bit longer time, but you will definitely have rental assistance in the meantime to cover your time away from your home.
All right. Will ONA help replace freezers?
Freezers in the house, yes, that'll be part of ONA. It'll be part of the personal property.
And for this disaster, where can we get the status of FEMA trailers?
Not sure exactly what you're asking. Where are the FEMA trailers? How are people being put in them? Or and feel free to unmute
How they
to.
can get access? Yeah, how they get access to them.
You have to apply for the FEMA assistance and request housing assistance through there, and then work with your FEMA agent to get the trailers assigned to you. You're not guaranteed a trailer. They will assess your situation and see what type of housing assistance you will be approved for.
All right, I think that's all the questions that I have here in the chat. If there are other questions that folks have, please place them in there.
All right, and
I don't see any other questions.
I was gonna say, Juan, if there's any questions, y'all should have my email in the slides that come through. Please feel free to email me at any time.
Terrific. I'm going to make a couple of announcements here for folks before we leave. And again, just for everyone to know, there's the hotline here for wildfire legal assistance here in New Mexico. This is open Monday through Friday from 9 to 1. And it's primarily, again, for fire survivors or victims in those 5 counties that we mentioned. And just a reminder, again, to everybody, the deadline to apply for FEMA aid has been extended to August 4th. 2022. I want to thank Shrushti for presenting today. Thank you so much. That information is very helpful. Her slide deck will be emailed to those of you that registered for this event. So you will have that you can refer to afterwards. We do have some additional upcoming community webinars that I want to make everybody aware of. And so the next scheduled webinars, as you can see there, there's one on court self-help centers and programs. These are for individuals who are going to be representing themselves in civil legal cases. That will be on July 27th. There'll be another presentation for those with disabilities on resources available for them. That'll be on August 10th. And similarly, there'll be another webinar on services available for seniors, and that'll be August 24th. All of these are on Wednesdays, and they're all from noon to 1:30 p.m. If you're not on our mailing list and you want to receive notice of future webinars, just send your contact information to me. There's the email address there, or place that information in the chat channel. And that concludes our presentation for today. Again, I want to thank all of those of you who participated. And again, thanks to Shrushti for your time and for your passion in helping us here in New Mexico. We appreciate that. And hopefully you'll come back one day and visit.
Definitely. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We're going to conclude this webinar.